Thank you, and welcome everyone to our webinar on securing the frictionless enterprise. My name is Adam Boone. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Certes Networks, and we're sponsoring this webinar for you today. And we're really excited to have a very intriguing topic to explore, the evolving security environment for IT. And we're very happy to have two industry experts with us today to explore these issues. First off, we're going to hear from Jason Bloomberg, who is the president of Intellyx and is a contributor to Forbes. And Jason is the leading industry analyst and expert on achieving agile digital transformation by architecting business agility into the enterprise. His writing can be found in Forbes, Wired, his biweekly newsletter, The Cortex. And as president of Intellyx, he advises businesses on their digital transformation initiatives, trains architecture teams on agile architecture, and he helps technology vendors and service providers to communicate their agility stories. His latest book is called The Agile Architecture Revolution, and it's available from Wiley and was published in 2013. And if you haven't read any of Jason's columns, his writings, his books on technology topics, especially these agility topics, I urge you to do so. Check them out. You'll find some great insights and analysis there. Next up, we'll hear from Satyam Tyagi, and Satyam is the Chief Technology Officer of Certes Networks. He's an industry thought leader and an innovator in IT security and networking. He holds 4 patents in advanced application security and network management. And he has been, if you're familiar with the Samsung Knox security suite, Satyam led the product teams that originated that groundbreaking product line. He also drove security product management at Juniper, Zscaler, and Superior Systems. And with that, I will now hand over to Jason, I will now dive into a little bit more detail on the topic that we'll be covering today, and then I'll hand over to Jason to dig into this even deeper. So today we're going to be talking about the hacking crisis that's been going on around the world and some of the elements of the changing IT environment that have led to that hacking crisis. So from our perspective, what we've seen out in the industry is that there really are 3 major negative things that have occurred in the IT environment and positive things that have occurred in the IT environment that have allowed this to happen. So the 3 very good, positive areas of evolution and innovation have been things like digitizing. So we've been able to digitize data that previously was on paper or was difficult to share or difficult to use for a frictionless business. We've put this data out onto servers so that it can be shared with our user base that may be mobile and our partners and our supply chain, for example. And now everybody is indeed mobile. We have employees who are using all different sorts of devices in all different types of locations, and this has all contributed to making business very frictionless. But at the same time, there are negatives here. And I'm approaching this with a little bit of humor, but you can see there is a dark side to digitizing, and that is that we have indeed digitized everything. Stuff that used to be on, say, paper under lock and key in your filing cabinet, these things are now shared out on the web or out on networks where they can be accessed by users. And guess what? Being able to share things means you also open them up to potential hacking and exposing them to unauthorized users or people that you don't actually want to get that information. And then, of course, yes, indeed, everybody is mobile. And the dark side of that, of course, is that we now have all kinds of devices that we previously did not have in our environments, introducing all kinds of unknown risks. So the common vector that we've seen in the data breaches that this new environment has brought about is really the failure of what is a basic security hygiene. It's the lack of proper segmentation and isolation of networks and applications. And Jason and Satyam are going to go into a lot more detail on this. But we see this as probably one of the primary attack vectors and area of risk that enterprises face today. And really what that amounts to is a new risk profile. because of the many breaches where a single user is able to be compromised and then the hackers gain access to the most sensitive applications in the enterprise, the truth is we're only now as secure as the least secure of our employees, our partners, our supply chain members, our external contractors that we're exposing these applications to. And, a very basic analogy, if we were focused on the perimeter and the firewalls that we've established for our perimeter, if you compare that to an office building, it's as if we've locked the doors of that office building. But once somebody is inside, they can go anywhere they want. They can look at any data they want. They can take anything they want. That's the new risk profile that we face here. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jason and let Jason explore securing the frictionless enterprise for us. Jason?
Thank you very much, Adam. And so my talk is on securing the frictionless enterprise. So a bit about me. Adam did do a great introduction. I'm president of Intellyx, focus on agile digital transformation, and write for Forbes, and there's my latest book as well. But moving right on to the topic of the frictionless enterprise. So if you think about the way we treat the enterprise from a security perspective, the traditional way of thinking is to put up our firewalls. Everything outside is untrusted, everything inside is trusted, and the firewalls are good enough in order to protect the enterprise. Well, that really hasn't been true for many years, since there's so many different ways that to penetrate that firewall perimeter. We get emails inside. There's any number of different ways that hackers can introduce malware, and as a result, we have to treat the inside the perimeter as untrusted and outside the perimeter as downright hostile. Right? There's just the perimeter-based security is just insufficient. But on the other hand, our digital initiatives are end-to-end, right? They're not enclosed within our perimeter. They involve customers, partners, they're in the cloud, and we need those sorts of digital applications to be frictionless in the sense that we don't want any kind of security or infrastructure issues to slow down interactions, to impede our business, or to adversely impact the customer experience. So all of this is part of the notion of the frictionless enterprise, where the enterprise is not just within the bounds of the security perimeter, but really includes all the customers, partners, all the websites, mobile apps, everything that the enterprise does to reach out to its broader audience. And all of this is part of that notion of a business ecosystem, right? Enterprises, companies don't stand alone. They're part of these broader business ecosystems of partners and customers. And on the technology side, there's a mirrored situation, right? We don't just use one product, but we're using many different products from many different vendors, and they all have to work together. And all of this, on the one hand, facilitates frictionless business, but on the other hand, introduces risks as well. So that's really the dark side of the frictionless enterprise, right? The more open we get, the more moving parts there are, the more participants there are in our ecosystem, the less secure we become, right? Because anytime we open a door to a customer, the hackers can find the same door. So unfortunately, it's just unrealistic to close the doors, right? Because that keeps out customers, that stops the business interactions that are now so critical to the way our corporations operate. So the challenge here is, how do we provide the adequate security but still allow for the openness that we need in order to conduct business the way that we need to in today's digital, frictionless, borderless world. So this essentially needs new ways of thinking about cybersecurity. We can't simply think about perimeter-based security. We can't simply think about locking stuff down. Rather, we have to think about how do we keep doors open but maintain security anyway. And that's a whole different way of thinking about security in the context of today's distributed organizations. So when we talk about perimeter security, that's an example of a network-based approach called network segmentation, where we break up our network into different pieces that are secured separately. So when we set up firewalls, we may have an internal network that is separate from the internet. But in large organizations, it's not just a single internal network. There may be VLANs or other segments. We may have VPNs, virtual private networks, for employees that are outside the perimeter. That's essentially a separate segment as well. So we have a traditional way of breaking up the network into these different pieces. That gives us a measure of security because that's compartmentalization is essentially how we try to keep the Titanic from sinking, right? That you compartmentalize the ship, and so the water only gets into one compartment and it doesn't sink the whole ship. Well, I have news for you. The Titanic sunk anyway, right? Compartmentalization didn't solve its problem. So compartmentalization, especially on the infrastructure level, is part of the story. Obviously, it's better than nothing. But it also has a lot of challenges, right? It fragments the network. It involves now a patchwork, piecemeal of different technologies. And of course, the more bits and pieces you have, the more incompatibilities and slowdowns and other issues that you'll have. And then when we think about these borderless applications, end-to-end digital apps that are connecting customers on mobile devices through the cloud to our back-end systems, having this sort of compartmentalized, network-based segmentation approach slows things down, right? And so it introduces friction, and that's what we're trying to avoid with the frictionless enterprise. So, great example of how this kind of problem manifests itself. There are many different, far too many examples over the last few years, but one that gained quite a bit of press is the Target breach, those Target stores. And if you remember, this breach happened, just last year or the year before, so it's not very long ago. And even though they have firewalls, as any enterprise would, the attack was mounted via a third-party contractor. So it was a heating and cooling guy, had access to some sort of, superficial application that was part of supporting the heating and cooling in one of the stores. An attacker compromised the credentials of that particular heating and cooling person, introduced malware into the network. Target was not aware that this was happening, and the malware enabled the hacker to move around within the network, just as Adam was explaining, right? You can lock the doors, but once a hacker's inside, they have free reign. And the hacker had plenty of time because Target had no idea this was going on for quite a while, went undetected, moved around the network, found what they were looking for, which was in this case credit card numbers, was able to, the malware was able to, exfiltrate or send those credit card numbers out to the bad guys. And Target wasn't aware until the damage had already been done. So this kind of pattern is very common now. This is essentially the, hacker 101. This is what hackers try to do. The malware is available. It's free. You can download it. It's easy to find. You don't have to be a huge, high-tech hacker. You can just find the malware that you need. And then you just need to compromise a particular user, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be, an experienced user. It could be a receptionist. It could be, in this case, a third-party contractor. And compromising their credentials is usually a phishing attack. You need to send them an email address an email that convinces them to enter their username and password, and that's all you need to do. So you need to find one person who is foolish enough to fall for that phishing attack out of the thousands and thousands of people that work at one of these companies, and then you use, free hacking software you download from the internet. So it's just so easy for the hackers to do this, and it's so difficult for the enterprises to prevent this. Right? It's very hard to prevent phishing attacks, and it's hard to prevent once the malware is installed, the malware actually operating. So we have this disconnect, this imbalance, where it's so easy for the hackers and hard for the enterprises to keep the hackers out. So the challenge here is we have these borderless enterprises, right? The perimeter is now irrelevant. Yes, we still have firewalls, and we still need them, but they're not the whole story anymore. We have distributed applications at third parties. They're in the cloud. If you look at a modern corporate website, especially a business consumer website, every page will have plugins and widgets and tags that are third-party, that are interacting with customer information. Any one of those could be compromised by a hacker. So we have this very complex, distributed environment that is very difficult to secure. So we need a borderless security approach, an approach that does not rely upon traditional infrastructure-based network segmentation. And furthermore, this is a business concern, right? It's not just the CISOs, the information security officers, and the CIOs who are worried about this. It's the CEOs and COOs, everybody in the organization. Because when one of these breaches, like the Target breach, occurs, that impacts the stock price. It impacts the reputation among customers. It gets them bad press, right? This is CEO level concern, and it's very important now to raise the consideration for raise threat mitigation up to that business level. Yes, it involves technical nuts and bolts under the covers, but getting it right is a business concern. And CEOs, COOs, and chief marketing officers, everybody responsible for the customer interaction, regardless of whether they're technical or not, is now wholly invested in getting security right, even though it is an increasingly technical challenge. Okay, so essentially what we have now is a post-trust world. We can't trust anybody. We can't trust anything. Any user could be compromised. Even if the person themselves is perfectly honest, they could be compromised with a phishing attack. Who knows, right? We can't trust any network. It doesn't matter if it's internal to our organization. It doesn't matter. Basically, we can assume that we've been compromised. And this is a truth that's very hard for many organizations to swallow. Breaches have already occurred. If you're in a large company with a lot of stuff going on, a lot of people, a complex network, hackers are already inside. Right? It's not a matter of keeping them all out. It's a matter of mitigating the damage that they can do even before you find them. Yes, you want to find them, and there's great tools to help you find them. And yes, you can stop them once you find them. Maybe, perhaps, at least there's tools to help you do that. And you can undo the damage to some extent depending upon what they're trying to accomplish. But ideally, you want to mitigate the damage even before you find them. And this takes us essentially back to the compartmentalization approach, but we have to avoid that network-centric compartmentalization, the network segmentation, because that isn't working for us, right? Perimeter-based security, the VLANs and the VPNs and all of that stuff, it's not working for us. It doesn't have the right business visibility or business control, and it's not well suited for the borderless applications, right? It may be better suited within the organization where you're controlling the network, but when you're including digital applications with third-party widgets and plugins, and you're including cloud providers that are third-party cloud providers, and there may be multiple parties there. If you're using a SaaS app in the cloud, it might be running in a different cloud on you might have a SaaS application running on Amazon, so Amazon's a participant, the SaaS provider's a participant. Any of those have employees that could potentially be compromised, as well as all the users, right? So we have this very complex environment where what we really have to do is raise the compartmentalization up to the application level. We have to give business users control over security policies, and we need to be able to establish application-level compartmentalization where we essentially abstract the physical network. So we can have an application that has a front-end piece that's running in the cloud and a back-end piece on-premise and maybe another piece somewhere else, but the whole thing is a single application, and we can compartmentalize it on that basis. Compartmentalization doesn't stop all attacks, but what it does is it gives you the ability to mitigate damage even before you understand the nature of the attack, right? So it's an attack mitigation approach, right? If a hacker breaks into one of these application-level, cryptographically isolated segments, they can do a little bit of damage, but they can't do that much damage. They can't do what the target hacker did and use a heating and cooling contractor's login to compromise credit card numbers, right? There would be no way to do that if you have the appropriate business policy-driven, cryptographically isolated segmentation at that application level that gives the business the ability to control the policies. So that's it for my bit, and that essentially transitions to Satyam's bit. Just a bit on this slide. There's my email address and my Twitter handle, the eBizWizard. And if you can't wait for the Certes folks to follow up with the deck, send an email right now to certes@intellyx.com. You'll get back a single, one and only one auto-response email with a link to the deck, a link to Certes video, and some other information. But you'll only get the one. Doesn't put you on a list or anything. Or you can just wait for Certes to follow up with you. That's fine as well. So let me turn it over to Satyam Tyagi with Certes Networks. Satyam, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jason. And it's amazing to see your energy about this topic, and thank you for setting up the stage about the problems that the enterprise has. So with that, let me introduce myself. I'm Satyam Tyagi. I'm the CTO for Certes Networks. I've been in security space for a while. A lot of work done in real-time communication security space. A lot of our work is now used by Avaya. And then I have worked in Samsung Knox quite a bit, which is really Android OS security based space. A lot of our work is now in the core Android included by Google in version starting from 4.0 of Android. And we are taking some of those principles, some of the things that we have done in all these different places and bringing it together as an enterprise architecture for proper security. So with that, let me jump into some of the slides that I have and drive you through how we can do a better job of securing a frictionless enterprise. So starting out, let's talk about the problem. I think Jason did talk about it a little bit. I want to take real data from some of the reports that are published. One of them is Verizon DBIR. And what they published is very, very interesting. This is specific to point-of-sale systems here, but it applies to all types of compromises. The hackers are able to get in within minutes. As Jason was saying, it's really, really easy for them to fish out a credential and use that to get into a network. But the detection tools we have, which do anomalies detection, which do advanced persistent threat detection, take a while to actually detect that and confirm that for us. It could be almost up to weeks before we detect that. And that's a big problem. In weeks, imagine you have your office locked down, but once somebody is inside, he's going through your files, looking through your stuff, stealing stuff and all that. And imagine you can't even see him for weeks. He's stealing things right in front of you, but completely invisible. And that's a challenge a lot of the industry is trying to address. And what they're trying to address is how do we reduce this gap? All these startups and even large established incumbent companies in security space are working really, really hard to reduce this gap. It starts with firewalls doing inspection, then APTs, and who knows what will be the next technology which will be trying to reduce this gap. The truth is, it's just more of the same. We have to have this realization and understanding this gap will never be zero. It will always be first the attack happens, gets through, and then we detect it depending on how stealthy the attack is in certain time. Say weeks becomes days, still that's a plenty of time to steal terabytes of data. So with that context in mind, let's look at what is a new approach that can help contain the damage instead of trying to completely block out these attacks. So let's start with the first thing that Jason talked about a little bit, that there is a strong perimeter and threat prevention. That's what firewalls were used to. We created a perimeter around our networks, our offices, and we ensured that nobody bad thing comes in. But as Adam talked about initially, that's just not true in the frictionless enterprise. We have too many different types of people now coming in and being able to access things, starting from contractors, employees, interns, customers, execs, guests in your enterprise. Everybody has ability to come inside the network. They have credentials, they have VPN logins, or they have certain apps that they can access and be inside the network. So what the next generation or current generation of security is trying to do is trying to do this threat detection and response, keep monitoring everything, do a lot of analysis on it, throw big data at it, use certain parameters from outside, analyze applications in sandbox, and so on, and try to, as we said, reduce the gap of when somebody breaks in or a breach happens and when you're actually able to detect it. What we believe the next generation needs to do is actually contain these threats. And by that, what I mean is, if we could segment along the business logic that certain users need access to certain applications, air conditioning contractor may only need access to applications which help him do billing, maybe invoicing, some sort of logging of hours, and things like that. But he really does not need access to your point of sale system, personally identifiable information. Maybe that's for the human resources department, finance systems, that's probably for the finance department, source code and design plans, that's more an engineering function. You don't have to give all those controls. If you had a way to cryptographically segment or along these business application and user needs dimensions and only give access to users based on the role, that would really be able to contain the damage if one of them gets compromised. So what that looks like is, if you have one user compromised, it should not mean everybody else is compromised. And that we'll talk about this, how this works, what Certes solution is, and how we can apply it within a given enterprise circumstances. So firstly, starting out with principles of segmentation, I think Jason did talk about a little bit about network segmentation, and I want to contrast this with what is really needed in a business. So we talked about there is really three things when you're doing segmentation. The first thing is, when you're building this castle, if you will, where do you create the lines? Where do you draw these walls on the castle? What do you segment along? So in the network segmentation world, the focus has been really around networks. You have internets, you have DMZs, you have LANs, you have WANs. You break them down with VLANs and ACLs and VRFs and different technologies, but it's all network infrastructure centric. To a business user, it makes almost no sense at all. What they really think is in terms of business applications. Okay, I have a sales applications, which is CRM. I have source code, which is engineering, and I have a billing application, which is contractors to log their hours and invoice. It does not translate to the networks as they're defined. In fact, somebody has to manually translate that into this. Who is granted access to this lines, to these systems, right? So when you're segmenting, first thing is, where do you draw the lines? Second thing is, who do you allow inside those lines? So again, going back in the network segmentation world, it is really, really focused around devices and networks, certain devices and certain networks which are corporate owned, corporate maintained, are implicitly trusted. Certain others, we will put some firewall which will inspect for malicious malware, but nothing more. It does not actually does user role access control. So it's not that this user will be allowed and this user will be not. It's more about this corporate laptop is allowed, or oh, this is coming from my branch office, this traffic is fine and let it in. And that's just the wrong type of thing you do when you are already assuming that your networks and devices could be breached. Lastly, who actually controls these lines? Who actually defines these segments is another very critical piece here. And it shouldn't be every contractor, every service provider you have which has anything to do with networking, or your network field engineers. Sometimes even your users have ability to manipulate which network segment they join. They could plug in the red jack and they are in segment 1. They plug in the black jack in their office and they're in a different segment, essentially bypassing the segmentation controls. In an ideal world, you want the security officer to be able to do these controls regardless of your infrastructure. Whether you own the networks, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's your service provider, you want an ability to have those security controls with your security office, because end of the day, for your compliance and for your failures, you are responsible and not these third parties and different people involved. The CEO and the CISO are probably the people who get fired or get made responsible for large breaches. So with that, let me jump into what we see and how we do it in Certes. We call the solution CryptoFlow, which essentially gives you a crypto-segmentation architecture. And the way it works is there is a component called CryptoFlow Creator, which is your centralized policy and key management system. And you define policies in terms of user roles and the applications they want to access and the security profiles you want to apply to them. So in this example, I have the red sales team and the blue administration team, and they need to access different types of applications. Maybe sales wants to access the application related to CRM, and these few admins need access to point of sale systems, and they want to manage that. So that's really the thinking that it is coming to this business logic that everybody understands. That's how your compliance reports need to look like, that these are the users who have access to credit card data, and these are the users who have access to customer data. And that intuitively makes sense to everybody, and that's exactly how you set the policies in. Once you set these policies, these are spread out to all the enforcement points in your network. Essentially what it's doing is, no matter where your red application servers are, whether it's in a data center, it's in the cloud, distributed across multiple data centers, it's a composition of multiple components. Any traffic coming out of these application servers is always encrypted with its own keys and is isolated virtually in a cryptographic segment. Same thing for the blue. Essentially, you are guaranteed with 256-bit encryption. The red will not come in the blue, and blue will not come in the red, and anything outside cannot come into them, because unless you have that 256-bit key or you have capability to crack that, there's no way you are getting in. So how do we get in? How do the users actually access these applications? The next part is we actually learn about the users and roles from your existing enterprise directory, whether it's your Active Directory, it's some other LDAP system, it's some single sign-on system, it does not matter. It plugs in, derives all these users and roles, who is allowed to do what, who belongs to sales, and who belongs to admin's user group. And then when the users try to access, first thing is established is this a valid user? Is he authenticated with proper strong credentials, multi-factor authentication, certificates, the correct device, and so on? And once that is established, second thing we look at is, what is his role? Is he sales? Is he admin? And then finally, based on that, he's granted access to the applications that are configured in his authorization profile, or which is sales is allowed to access the red application, which is the CRM, and admin is allowed to access the blue application, which is the point of sale systems. And what we have done here is drastically reduced the attack footprint that you have. So instead of having any single user compromised and everything compromised in your enterprise, now you can be very well assured that if a user calls and he says, hey, my phone is lost or stolen, what is the potential damage for that? So if that user is a contractor, you'll say, oh, the invoicing billing application is compromised. Maybe I will have somebody log more hours than they were supposed to, but nothing major is compromised. And if you think about it, these admins who maintains the security and policy for your point of sale systems are very few, first of all, and secondly, are the most security savvy people in the organization. They know what they're doing. They are the ones who don't click on those phishing links and get that easily compromised. So that's really what's reducing your threat vector from 300,000 contractors and employees to those 4 or 5 admins who are the most security savvy people in the organization. And that's how you protect the most sensitive applications and data you have from exposure as it is exposed today. So looking at this in action, what exactly really happens, right? So as we talked about, applications are individually cryptographically isolated, but users are granted access based on their roles and the authorization policy. So here I have 3 segments that are defined, and now what we have done is we have eliminated the possibility of lateral movement. So lateral movement is a term used which essentially says a hacker gets in through a low privileged user into the network using their credentials, and then he scans the networks and hops from one network or one application to another application to another application, looking for valuable things that he needs and compromises them one by one. By cryptographically isolating them, if the user is compromised and hacker gets in, that lateral movement is completely stopped. So if this user that I'm showing here in the red is compromised, it is contained with whatever access that user has. There is no way he can jump or even send a packet or scan to anything else because it will not have the right keys and cryptographic signature and will be dropped right at the entry point. That's how CryptoFlows essentially works in action. Now, going back to what we set as the premise, what are we accomplishing here? What we are trying to accomplish here is cryptographic segmentation, which is very much business-centric. So you're defining your policies at the business level. What are your business applications? And they are isolated into their own segments. Second thing we are doing here is we are granting access based on the business roles and the business needs of the users. If a user has a particular role, he's granted access to those particular applications. This is not very uncommon in the real world, especially in the military organizations, but even in our enterprises. There's concepts of need-to-know basis, there's concept of clearance levels, and there's concept of even if you have a very high clearance, you are the CTO of the company or CFO of the company or a general in an army, you don't get access to everything. You get access to things that you need to do your function. If you are working on a specific project, you get access to that. If you are working as a technology engineer, you get access to source code and design. You necessarily don't get access to financial data of the company. And same thing applies to the finance team. They really don't need access beyond the finance team into the source code. But that's really not true of our networks today. It's very, very infrastructure-centric controls, which do not translate well into the frictionless enterprise. We used to be able to marry an application to a network, to an IP address, to a server. But in this virtualized world, in this cloud world, in this more and more frictionless enterprise, where things move at a very, very fast speed, things are not manually moved. It's all software defined as you need things move. And hence your policies and applications around these applications need to be much more dynamic and cannot be in the infrastructure. Lastly, the security officer is the one who needs to manage these policies. It can't be managed on a per application basis or a per network basis or different components. Your branch has a different network engineer, and some branches are maintained by field engineers. And by the way, you give access to contractors and they manage their own networks, and you have service providers and so many things. That's just not the way how security needs to be done. It needs to be controlled by the security office for the people who will be responsible for the compliance and security needs of the enterprise. So lastly, why does this succeed where network segmentation fails? It is very much business centric. It is end to end, not on silos, segment by segment, not divided something in LAN, something in DMZ, something on the internet, something in third-party clouds, and so on. It is enforced with strong cryptography. The biggest beauty of cryptography is it's infrastructure independent. It's not controlled by the settings and policies in the infrastructure, but controlled by who controls the keys. And the last most important point is it is really controlled by the security officer, and not everybody or anybody who has access to a single router or switch or a networking device throughout your enterprise or sometimes even third parties. So how do we start applying this in your business practices? The way you start applying this is, first thing you need to understand is what is really your business-driven security requirements. Don't start thinking, I have to secure this LAN or I have to secure this segment. Think from the business perspective, what are the business-driven security requirements? And then think what you have today can change any time. Some business department will come and say, I need to deploy this application in this much time, and if you can't do it, I am going with the SaaS application like Dropbox and using it. And even if you don't have the compliance and security rules there, they'll say, business needs to get done. We are going to do it. They may not even tell you that it's going to run. They'll give you a time frame. It's not done in 3 weeks. Sorry, we are off. We are using Dropbox, and which is a very, very big hole called shadow IT. It's a discussion for another topic. Then the third thing is, does your security architecture help you or hinder you when your business needs change? And lastly, we don't want to ignore the realities of the frictionless enterprise. People are mobile, devices are bring your own. People do access email on their personal devices. They do access enterprise data on personal devices, enterprise applications, and so on. And we are moving for efficiency reasons, for scalability reasons, for agility reasons, from a fixed server model to a virtualized, to a private or public cloud model. And these things will keep accelerating, not even just moving, but accelerating to support the business agility need. So how does our security work in those environments? So lastly, to remember that breaches will happen. They probably have already happened. Some have been found and some not. In surveys, what we have seen is more than 50% of enterprises believe they have been breached. I think that's a very, very low number. If people are interested, you have enough valuable stuff, they are probably ramming against your firewall and getting in and looking at things. So when a breach does happen, and when you learn about it, do you panic or do you actually have a plan and understanding that, oh, this is where the breach happened and it is contained. It will not sink the whole Titanic, but I need to go and fix just that component of it. So how do we actually practically apply crypto segmentation? How do we get into this mindset of cryptographically segmenting applications? Easiest way is you can try it step by step. You don't have to have all your things start at once. You can start with the most sensitive application you have, prioritize them, and determine which user roles need access to it, and just start applying to that. And as you get comfortable, you can expand it out to other applications and eventually have all your applications cryptographically segmented. So, quoting one of the famous people in the industry and modifying their code to security is that you have to start with business needs and work backwards towards security. It cannot be other way that this is my infrastructure, it has certain deficiencies, and force business practices around it. You cannot go and say you cannot use your iPad or you cannot use certain things because my infrastructure is not ready to secure it. People will go and start doing shadow IT, start doing cloud-based applications, and your security will still be not able to handle it. So we really think that's a very, very important aspect, that let business drive security and not the other way around. With that, I will hand over to Adam, who will be running the Q&A session for us. Thank you all for joining. Really excited to be presenting with Jason and Adam.
Great. Thank you, Satyam, and thanks for the insight and the interesting discussion around crypto segmentation. And thanks also to Jason for the setting the stage for us. We've had a bunch of questions flowing in, and just as a reminder to all the attendees, you can enter your questions into the Q&A interface, and we'll be sorting through as many as we can cover here in the next couple of minutes. The first question coming in, I'm going to direct to Jason because it looks like it is focused primarily on the new enterprise landscape and touches on some of the aspects of enterprise agility that Jason is expert in. So Jason, with the picture that we've painted here, and I think they're referring to sort of the new risk environment that enterprises are facing, it seems like a bad idea to put anything out on a network at all. It is just too risky. Are you suggesting the company should abandon the new applications? And I think what they're driving at here is they're going to be, with the security risks and breaches we've seen, is there going to be a chilling effect on some of the adoption of these enterprise agility applications and the like? What are your thoughts there, Jason?
Well, I must say it is tempting to disconnect from the internet entirely and go live in the woods as a hermit, but for many people, that's not a practical solution. The real answer is that with any risk consideration, you have to weigh the risk versus the cost of mitigating the risk, right? One thing to keep in mind is that perfect risk is impossible. Another way of saying that is, perfect security is impossible. Another way of saying that is that perfect security is infinitely expensive, right? If whatever security you put in place will mitigate your risk to a certain extent, but there will still be risks that remain, and it will cost a certain amount, but you could always spend more. So any organization has to understand their risk profile and then understand how to budget appropriately for it. So and that's always what we have to do. So the challenge is having the right information, right? Getting the best information about what risks you're facing and the potential cost of breaches and things like that, and then to make the appropriate decisions about how to invest the money that you do have into security in order to balance those as optimally as possible. And that's really the challenge, right? There's no way to eliminate risk, and we could always spend more on security. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And as you're answering it, I'm reminded of the image that you had on one of your slides in the presentation where you showed a barn with the barn door hanging wide open. And I think that's the point, right? The horse is out of the barn. If you're not already thinking about the new risk profile in terms of which applications you're sharing and such, then you need to get on the ball there.
Right. There was no horse in that picture because, of course, the horse is long gone. So yeah. Sort of the point there is that the old saying, closing the barn doors after the horse is gone, and that's one of the challenges with dealing with these breaches. If the breach has already occurred, yes, you can increase your security to keep hackers out, but the damage is already done. So mitigating damage is an important part of the story, not just preventing damage.
No doubt, no doubt. Very good. Okay, we have several more questions coming in. Thanks again, everybody, for posting your questions here. So this one I'm going to direct to Satyam, and it gets into a couple more of the technical details around the application segments and the crypto segmentation that you've been describing. So I'm going to try and combine these into one question here for you. Can you describe how users are authenticated to give them access to the application segments? And what sort of parameters, what sort of policy parameters like time or other parameters can be applied to the role-based access there?
Thank you, Adam. Very good question here. So as we talked about this, that the most critical part here is to give role-based access. And of course, to give the role-based access, we first need to know who the user is and what his role is. So we believe in very, very strong authentication, but it should have an experience that does not hamper the user from using the application itself. So we are looking at more transparent modes of authentication, like certificates and strong authentication from that perspective, multi-factor authentication. What we do is we work with your existing authentication mechanisms. We can enable authentication with our own mechanisms with certificates. But the best part is if you have a single sign-on system, we can work with some of them as well. So we are looking to do SAML-based integration with most of the security authentication companies, single sign-on companies. And what that allows us to do is let you choose the type of authentication mechanism that works for you, and we will ensure that we use the same. Sorry, okay. The second part of your question was about how flexible are these policies around time-based and right. So the policies are really, really designed around the business needs type of things. So they are very, very flexible around which applications users are allowed to access, which users are allowed to access. I think the specific question there was around time-based. So time-based is definitely possible. It is not exposed today. It's a very simple thing to expose time-based. But I like the direction where the question is going. Stop thinking in terms of infrastructure and is it this network or that network. Think in terms of what business needs are. So time is a very, very business-centric piece and definitely something very applicable here.
Yeah, okay, excellent. And a related question that we have here is, again, related to the role-based access control you've been describing. What happens when you have thousands of roles in your enterprise? Presumably, we're there talking about a larger enterprise and one that may have people wearing multiple different hats or having different roles. How does your process handle that kind of volume?
Right. Very, very good question again here. So in fact, having lots of roles and lots of applications and having more granular segmentation actually is really, really good for you because you are controlling your exposure that much. So you're limiting your exposure that much. From the perspective of how many roles or how much our system scales and policies, I kind of showed in the beginning without getting in too much detail. It's a very, very distributed architecture and can have thousands, tens of thousands of these policies. But second part being that it does get complicated for an admin to manage all this. So where we derive all these roles are from your directory. So you can group them. You can use multiple roles combined and give them access to an application. So the system is very, very flexible. And if you choose to, you can start out with 1, 2, 3 very sensitive applications with very few roles who need to access them and start your security there. So sort of knock out the big holes first, or the most valuable assets, as Jason was saying, where you perceive the more risk, which is a function of the value of asset and the exposure, and control the exposure for that first. So it gives you ability to scale as much as you want, but you can also start very, very small to what is most sensitive and most risky for you.
Great. Okay. We have a couple more questions here. One that's come in is a pretty lengthy question and fairly technical in nature, and I'm going to try and summarize it here a bit. So the question focuses on where and how this cryptography is applied when we're doing the segmentation on an application basis. And the question is, does it encrypt the IP flow of the data, by which I think we're talking about things like the IP header, and how do tools that are monitoring payloads or monitoring the communications or the particular application, how do those tools operate when you have an application that's being protected by a crypto segment?
So
you want to jump on that one?
Yes, definitely. A very good question here again. So it is always a challenge how you distribute this. The simplest way to understand this is whenever you are doing security, you want to do it end to end. So there are two pieces of the puzzle which we are talking about. One is the users and other is the applications. So you want to have security or terminate as close to the applications as possible. So one of the enforcers will be sitting as close to your applications as possible, if you imagine that. And the other is wherever your users are, that's where you want the other enforcers to be present. So that way you have minimum number of gaps in your security posture. But of course, this does give you a challenge that how do you then monitor some of the things that are required for your malware analysis, for your analytics, for different types of reasons, without going into that. So what the beauty of our solution is, I'm getting a little bit technical here, called group VPNs or group keying. So all the appliances are deployed with one common criteria for each application. It's shared across all of them. So the easiest way is to get clear traffic where you need it, say to a tap or a monitoring interface, or to even a firewall interface, is to put one of our appliances there. Doesn't matter how packets reach it. Once it reaches, it can encrypt and decrypt using the same policies and give you the traffic in clear. There are other ways also people have done this. Sometimes they deploy us in layer 3, layer 4 encryption mode, where they can keep the IP headers or even the TCP UDP headers in the clear, which allows a lot of network monitoring tools like NetFlow and JFlow to work properly. And even your load balancers and TCP based proxies to work properly as well. Third thing people do is more on the internal LAN side, where they do security, but they keep the encryption in the clear. So what I mean by that is they are doing strong integrity protection with SHA-1, SHA-256, or so on, but they are not doing AES encryption. So what that does is it still has cryptographically segmented, so you have still created a wall which cannot be penetrated, but it is not a privacy wall. So it's a glass wall, it's a bulletproof glass wall, if you will. Nothing comes in, but you can see inside. And that is sometimes acceptable in a LAN type scenario. So there are multiple solutions. Of course, our recommended solution is to put one of our enforcement points next to your monitoring systems, and it works really, really well.
Okay, very good. With that, we're at the top of the hour and we are out of time. So I want to thank everyone for attending and engaging with us and asking the questions. For anybody who asked questions that we didn't get a chance to respond to live here, we'll make every effort to reach out to you and respond to your question afterward. Also, everyone who registered, you'll be receiving the white paper and slides within the next 24 hours. And you can also visit the link that's there on our page that allows you to see the CryptoFlow solutions and the Crypto-Segmentation in action. I want to thank Satyam, our CTO, for his presentation and content, and most definitely want to thank Jason Bloomberg for his contribution here today and the great analysis and insights that he provided. And with that, we will wrap up and say thank you to everyone for attending.